Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Welcome back, hopefully, to some of you, to our monthly threat briefing series. These sessions, which we generally hold on the last Thursday of each month, we use for our threat intelligence team to uncover the latest trends, tactics and techniques employed by adversaries who seek to exploit vulnerabilities in our digital ecosystems, whether this is a ransomware attack crippling a business or an espionage campaign designed to target sensitive data. The team helped to uncover the multifaceted nature of these threats and try and equip you with some actionable insights to help you defend your organization. By way of introduction, my name's Philip Ridley. I'm the Head of Security Response here at Adarma, and today I'm joined by the fantastic Jerry Bruin, who's one of our threat specialists. Over the next 30 minutes or so in today's session, Jerry's going to discuss some of the current challenges facing businesses when it comes to authentication of end users. We'll look at the current state of authentication, the associated risks and exploits, with a particular focus on AI-enabled attacks as well. And finally, we'll discuss what the future holds for authentication, particularly around the quantum space, which is a looming threat. And we'll try and again arm you with some takeaways, some things that you might need to think about to help prepare your organization. We are going to have time for Q&A at the end of the session. So if you do have any questions, please just pop them into the Q&A box and we'll get to those at the end. We'll do our best to cover as many as we possibly can. So to get us started, I'm just going to give a very brief introduction into Adarma. So Jerry, if you want to flick onto the first slide, please. Thank you. So for those of you that don't know us, Adarma is the leading UK-based independent security operations specialist, delivering an integrated suite of advisory, engineering and managed services, typically to large, complex organisations. Next slide, please, Jerry. Thank you. We're lucky enough to work with some of the UK's most recognisable brands, some FTSE 350 companies across a wide range of industry verticals from financial services, retail, manufacturing and mining. One of the key tenets of the whole Adarma philosophy is transparency. So we are open and honest about everything that we do, and we share that, the good and the bad, everything together. Next slide, please, Jerry. And finally, our portfolio of services. Can you click through, Jerry? Thank you very much. So, oh, too far, the joys of PowerPoint. There we go. Adarma has a comprehensive portfolio of consulting, engineering and managed services, which we really have designed to help our customers mature their security operations in light of today's advanced threats. So we have three main pillars: detection and response, exposure management and threat intelligence, which is obviously what we'll hear about today. But all our services are integrated in nature and provide our customers with modular and flexible solutions based on your specific needs. So that's enough from me. I'll hand you over to Jerry, who'll deliver the bulk of today's session.
Thank you very much, Phil, and good morning and welcome to this month's threat briefing. As Phil said, this topic is all around authentication, threats to authentication methods and what the future holds in this space. Content-wise, we'll start off by briefly explaining what the different authentication factors are, before we then jump into a bit of a past, present and future and finish off looking in quantum and its impact into the authentication space. So jumping right into it, we'll discuss the authentication factors. So broadly, these fit into one of the following: something you know, something you have and something you are. Something you know is the most traditional factor. This is covering things like passwords, PIN numbers, combinations, etc. Knowledge factor that you have access to. The more modern one that we have is the something you have. So this is things like phone apps, USB devices, access cards, a physical device which is required to authenticate. Something you are is when we now move into our biometric data, fingerprints, facial recognition, iris scans, etc. We can also bring in a further two factors, which is somewhere you are and what time you are. These are increasingly becoming more common factors to ensure logins are only from expected countries and does not allow impossible travel, something like travelling from Glasgow and then being logging in 10 minutes later from London. As we start to combine these factors, that's when we move into two-factor authentication or 2FA. And as the name suggests, it uses two distinct authentication factors, typically something you know and something you have. Simply having two passwords is not 2FA, as it's only employing a single factor. Multi-factor authentication then, as the name suggests, requires more than two factors, typically something you know, something you have, and something you are. A common system these days kind of sits on the edge between 2FA and MFA. Authentication would require a password and use of an authentication app. Now, I say this sits on the edge as modern smartphones will unlock with both facial recognition or fingerprint scans, which would mean three factors are at play. However, since phones can also be unlocked with just a PIN number, that would drop it back down to only requiring two factors, albeit you are required to know two things. So if we have a bit of a dive into the past now and talk about passwords. So passwords have existed as long as computers have. First passwords being attributed to Fernando Corbato of MIT back in 1960. And as long as passwords have existed, people have tried to break them. The generally accepted complex password, the idea of the upper and lowercase letters, numbers and special characters, was proposed by Bill Burr, not the comedian, of NIST back in 2003. And despite him since trying to walk back on that advice, it's still generally considered the accepted standard in most places. Now, some research from Google shows that 52% of passwords are reused across multiple accounts. And data from FIDO indicates that passwords are the root cause of over 80% of breaches. These stats are a little bit older now, but I wouldn't expect them to have changed dramatically at all. So the problem with passwords really is a simple one, that humans are lazy. We will seek the path of least resistance and try and create patterns to make things easier to remember. This regularly makes passwords inherently insecure, as they're based on easily discoverable information such as dates of birth, pets' names, family names, or people will simply have the same few passwords they're using everywhere. Even if these are the most secure passwords in the world, if you use it in multiple places, it only requires a single data breach to cause a cascade of further other account compromises. A simple look at the website of Have I Been Owned, ran by Troy Hunt, can quickly show you the scale of the problem. And down the side here, I've listed just a handful of the top 100,000 passwords as found within Have I Been Owned. Now, if you want a little bit of a break from your day-to-day, I do recommend checking out the password game on neil.fun for a look into how absurd password requirements could become. I think my personal record is rule 25 before the chaos got a little bit too much for me. So thankfully, advice on secure passwords is now starting to change, with password managers and randomly generated passwords being the best solution we have. But at some point, we still need secure passwords which are rememberable by a human, even if it's just a single password to access your password manager. Back in August of 2011, Randall Munroe of XKCD put out the Correct Horse Battery Staple comic discussing passwords. This was quite contentious at the time, but now 13 years later, we're seeing NCSC adopt basically this exact system with their 3 random words as a method of making a good password. And if NCSC are agreeing with you, then you're probably doing something right. So it is now pretty well accepted that passwords are fundamentally weak, and as such, we have to employ 2FA and MFA to act as a crutch for their failure. So that brings us into the present and looking at some of these MFA systems. And the most common is the time-based one-time passwords, delivered typically either on a mobile phone, through SMS, email, or key fobs if you're old school. And while these are undoubtedly an improvement over just passwords, they do all have their own vulnerabilities which can be exploited. Email verification can run foul of the same problems as passwords. Password reuse or patterning within the passwords can lead to your email account being compromised. And if that is your MFA method, then again, it can cause a further cascade of compromises. So you then need to secure your MFA method with another MFA method. Web-based email clients also run the risk of having session cookies hijacked, allowing them to sidestep that authentication entirely. With SMS-based codes, this puts you at risk of SIM swap attacks. This is where a threat actor will move your phone number to a SIM card in their possession, allowing the SMS code instead to be sent to them. This is typically achieved either by an insider within a phone company or with people conducting snatch and grabs of tech from brick and mortar phone shops to then enable it. There's an entire underground community dedicated purely to conducting SIM swap attacks, and this has been used against multiple cryptocurrency marketplaces and wallets, resulting in the theft of millions of dollars worth of cryptocurrency. So one major threat that's present across all of these methods is the ever-present social engineering attack. Increasingly common is the MFA bomb or MFA fatigue attack, which is where you simply bombard the victim with so many requests that they eventually accept just to make the spam stop. Another common technique is contacting the victim claiming to be a customer service rep or an IT employee. And that due to an account issue, they need access to this authentication code. All of these time-based one-time passwords also suffer from a risk of a compromise to the company providing them. If anyone's read the original APT1 report by Mandiant, it was detailing a Chinese intrusion into RSA so as to compromise RSA one-time password devices. That is a risk that still exists, albeit almost certainly limited to the domain of only highly advanced threat actors. So if everything we currently have has flaws, what do we have available to us in the future? So one of the increasingly popular options we're seeing is the use of OAuth 2.0 or single sign-on. But this doesn't actually resolve the issue. You're simply outsourcing the problem to someone else, typically Microsoft, Google, or Apple. And you could actually make an argument that in the case of someone's login credentials being leaked, the first place threat actors will try and use these combinations is against Microsoft, Google, or Apple accounts. So then passwordless authentication is becoming the major talking point. If these MFA systems we have are simply propping up dead passwords, why not remove passwords from the equation entirely? Facilitating that are newer emerging authentication tools such as Fast Identity Online 2 or FIDO2, which is an open standard for passwordless authentication using public key encryption. It can run on mobile phones, wearable smart tech, USB keys, and near-field communication, with the public key being held by the login service and the private key on the FIDO2 device. The biggest risk to this technology, however, is still that social engineering risk. Since FIDO2 requires some kind of external device, phone, watch, etc., it has a device which can break or be lost or stolen. So this requires companies to have some method for which to bypass or replace this in these kind of circumstances. So how then do we verify someone's identity where they've lost their authentication device? Requiring the person to physically attend an IT department is probably the safest option. But if you're a globally distributed company or have remote workers, that's likely not possible. And if this issue has arisen with a client or a customer instead of a staff member, then it's frankly unreasonable to expect them to physically attend somewhere to reset an account. Email inherently has a very, very low trust rating in these kind of scenarios. And in the case of a corporate account, it's likely they've lost access in the first place due to not having their FIDO device. A phone call would then be the next stage. While it's possible their smartphone is unusable, it's reasonable to expect that most people could organise making a phone call in some way. But then how do we verify the person is who they say they are? Can we trust a phone call? Personal details like names, addresses, date of births are very easily compromised by threat actors, so we then have to look at using some kind of voice recognition software to verify the identity. Can we trust someone's voice on the phone? And these days, no, we can't. The power of AI voice generation software has reached the point of generating convincing likeness with often very minimal input samples of a person's voice. And if the victim has a lot of voice samples available, such as from talks at meetings, conferences, or webinars, then these generations can be incredibly realistic. And already we're seeing real-life examples of AI generation being used by threat actors. We've seen a string of reports of AI voices being used to facilitate kidnap scams, targeting payments, and pretending to be banks. We are also seeing this being used in highly planned attacks targeting large organizations. These will typically have a phone call using the voice of a CEO or a CFO and use other social engineering tricks such as generating fear and a sense of urgency to prompt a large transfer of funds to the threat actor. So if we can't trust emails and we can't trust phone calls, could we trust verifying someone's identity via a video call? And once again, unfortunately, no, we can't due to the emergence of these AI technologies. AI face swap exists in pretty much everyone's pocket already with things like TikTok and Instagram filters, but higher end AI models can create incredible convincing likeness in real time. So I have a video here, which hopefully should start playing to demonstrate this. Now, this particular video is likely not done in real time, but does still demonstrate the level that can be achieved with AI face swap models. There are also examples of video AI assistants that can respond in real time with this kind of quality, albeit they're using real life actors who've been extensively recorded to generate them. So real life face swaps do have some issues, especially to the trained or the experienced eye. But the question is, would it pass a customer service agent who is on their 100th call of the shift? And the answer to that is probably. Just this month, we've seen British engineering company Arup confirm that it was victim of an AI voice and video fraud attack in Hong Kong, resulting in £20 million being transferred to 5 different bank accounts across 15 transactions. And this is tech that will only improve in the coming months and years. So do we have any biometrics which are safe from rapid AI advancements? And the answer is that at this point, we're stuck in an AI arms race. AI is being used to help biometric authentication. We have things such as liveliness detection and texture analysis when doing facial recognition. However, whenever these models implement new defenses, generative AI models can quickly employ similar systems to defeat those defenses. Another risk that exists here is that if your biometric data is compromised from some kind of storage database, while you can always get a new password or an MFA device, you can't get a new face or a new fingerprint. Once that data is out in the wild, it is forever compromised. Multimodal biometrics, so requiring face, iris, and fingerprint scanning simultaneously, is likely the best solution, as using Gen AI to defeat all of those systems at the same time would be incredibly difficult. So to bring us back into the next topic, I'd mentioned with the FIDO2 topics that the FIDO2 tokens that they run on public key encryption. So that will then bring us into the final topic of quantum cryptography. So within this, there's two major areas to talk about. Quantum cryptography, which is the use of the principles of quantum mechanics to encrypt data, and post-quantum cryptography, which is an attempt to develop new cryptographic systems which are secure against both quantum and classical computers, also known as quantum-resistant cryptography. So current public key encryption is covering things like RSA encryption, elliptical curve cryptography, and Diffie-Hellman key exchange. And currently they are secure mathematical-based algorithms. They work on one-way functions and involve factoring of very large prime numbers. And while they are suitable now, they are at risk in the future due to Shor's factoring algorithm. So Shor's factoring algorithm works against a target number. It selects a random smaller integer and uses the greatest common divisor of the target and the random integer to calculate if the number has already been factored. It then conducts a calculation to determine if a new random integer is required or if the sought-after factors have been discovered. Now that's clearly a very simple description of what's a complex algorithm, and doing it with small numbers is possible on standard computers, but for cryptographically secure numbers, a quantum computer is required. And in essence, what this means is that a suitably powerful quantum computer can calculate the factors used to generate public and private keys in current asymmetrical encryption. Post-quantum or quantum-resistant cryptography currently does not exist, or if it does, the people aren't revealing that they've created it. And this is the major push for the encryption community. Unlike with AI, there was an arms race to try and create and implement new encryption solutions before a powerful enough quantum computer arrives to invalidate current encryption. The other area that we have is that of quantum cryptography. So this is the science of using quantum mechanical properties to perform cryptographic tasks. Best example of this at the moment is quantum key distribution, or QKD. So quantum key distribution allows two parties to produce a shared random key, known only to them, which they can then use for further encryption. And notably, quantum is only used to produce the key. The key is then used in traditional symmetrical encryption systems. So how does it work? So quantum key distribution is not a fully agreed upon standard. So there are multiple protocols demonstrated within this space. The one we're going to take a look at is BB84 protocol. So quantum key distribution works using a series of photons. And to use the traditional encryption naming convention, we'll have Alice, who's transmitting these photons to Bob. So Alice will transmit these photons to a polarizer, which randomly gives each photon one of four possible polarizations. Vertical is a 0, horizontal is a 1, 45 degrees right as a 0, or 135 degrees right as a 1. This might look at first glance like it generates 2 bits, but that's not the case. So we're going to have a look now at what Bob does with this stream of photons. So Bob has a receiver, and that receiver has 2 beam splitters, one for the horizontal and vertical, and one for the diagonal. Each photon can only be sent into a single splitter. However, Bob doesn't know how Alice has polarized each of these photons, as such will randomly select which to choose. Once this stream of photons has been transmitted, Alice and Bob will then speak on a traditional secured communication channel and compare the results. In cases where both Alice and Bob used the same polarization filter, the basis, and measured the same result, that bit is then taken into the shared secret key. Once the comparison has been completed for the entire stream, you will have your shared secret key at the end of it. The question at this point is, what advantage does this have over classical symmetric encryption algorithms, especially if you still require another secure communication channel to discuss the results? And the answer to that lies in the fundamentals of quantum mechanics, and that is the observer effect. The observer effect is the disturbance of an observed system by the act of observation. The best real-world comparison would be checking the air pressure of your tyre. In order to do this, you need to connect a device which will allow some air to leave the tyre while connecting it. You have modified the air pressure of the tyre by trying to measure it. With quantum key distribution, this means that if a third party attempted to observe the photons during the key exchange, it would disturb or modify them, causing significant observable errors which would become apparent during the comparison. If this happens, they would simply discard the entire exchange and do it again. The other advantage is in how the key itself is generated. Classical encryption methods work on logical mathematical functions, and their security lies in the time and effort that's required to reverse engineer the key. In the case of quantum key distribution, there is no logic or algorithm to reverse. It is truly random. That gives us an end result of a random key which cannot be observed by a third party during generation and cannot be cracked except through sheer brute force. There are other protocols implementing quantum key distribution, some of which involve quantum entanglement of photons, quantum entanglement being a group of photons which are geographically separated, but whose quantum state cannot be described independently of the state of the others. The big question really around all of this is it real, and will it work in the real world? And the answer is yes, it is real. Quantum key distribution has been used in multiple real-world tests, including methods which employ quantum entanglement. However, there are severe limitations. It requires a direct connection between two endpoints and is limited to fiber runs of under 400 kilometers. So if you're a globally distributed company, that very quickly becomes a real issue. So it is impractical and unsurprisingly expensive to set up, but is it safe? I kind of hinted that it might be a minute ago, but that's unfortunately not entirely true. Much like password hacking has existed as long as the password, quantum hacking techniques have existed as long as quantum cryptography. Quantum key distribution already has several demonstrated attacks against it: faked state, phase remapping, and time shift attacks. So as we move now to the end of the presentation, what is the solution? How do we authenticate securely? Truth is, I don't know. If I had the answer, I wouldn't be here. I'd be trying to sell some innovative tech startup to Microsoft for millions. I think it's clear that passwords are dead. They're currently on a weekend at Bernie's with better authentication methods. Passwordless authentication using public key encryption is likely the best option we have, especially if those devices are then secured with multimodal biometric requirements. Cybersecurity has always been a team sport, and it's imperative that as a team, we focus on creating and implementing quantum-resistant algorithms as soon as possible, including within that passwordless authentication system. And we hope that generative AI gives more to defenders than it does to the attackers. And with that, thank you very much for your time, and I'm happy to take any questions that you might have.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jerry. A really, really insightful, very, very interesting sort of cutting edge topic, especially with the quantum effect. While people are typing their questions in, I have a couple of my own, if that's okay. So you obviously showed some examples during the presentation of how AI has been used to sort of take advantages of weaknesses in some of the authentication schemes that are available. Is there any way that, you know, or any examples we've got that we can show AI as being supportive of existing authentication teams? So has it been used to, you know, empower or improve the existing authentication mechanisms?
I think the one that's in kind of everyone's hand is with some of the AI advancements that we've had in facial recognition. If you take a slightly older smartphone and show it with facial kind of unlock and show it a picture of yourself, it will unlock from a picture. Whereas the more modern ones are using liveliness detection. They need whatever they're looking at to be animated and moving in some way in order for it to unlock. So there's already things like that that are having a real world impact on standard household tech that everyone's got access to. And it's going to be continuing to roll that out. There's been research previously in master faces, they were called, which was essentially a kind of master key idea to unlock any facial recognition tech. So having these things, that texture analysis to try and bypass them is really what we need in order to make biometric data secure. Same with iris recognition as well. It's really easy to kind of replicate a picture of someone's eye. So you need all these other AI advancements to detect that it's not a picture.
Got it. Yeah, fair enough. That makes perfect sense. So I think would it be a fair comment to say that we've sort of got as is traditional in security, you've got to stack these things on top of each other to try and get a best of all breeds, I suppose.
Yeah, 100%. The kind of comparison that I would use is to how antivirus software works. Kind of back in the day, in the original days of antivirus, it was done based on kind of signatures of specific malware and viruses. So it was just a race between people creating viruses, the antivirus people would get the signatures, upload it, and it would just be a constant race. Whereas now, the antivirus stuff is working more behavioral. It's looking for the behaviors of the virus rather than the specific signatures of it. And it's a similar thing that we need to do within AI. We need to stop looking for a specific way that things are being done and just be kind of that more behavioral to be able to kind of authenticate securely.
Fantastic. Thank you. If anyone's having any issues with the Q&A function, you can always drop questions straight into the meeting chat as well. I know unfortunately Microsoft Teams doesn't always like the Q&A session, but one more question from me and then we'll finish off. So quantum, I think, is a very, still very much an emerging space, but it is, I think, as you said, Jerry, it is something that's moving quickly. I don't know if you have any thoughts on, for example, the NIST sort of call for quantum resistant algorithms, things like that. Is that something? No doubt that I know internally we're keeping an eye on it, but is it something we would recommend to to our customers, potential businesses out there that are concerned about this thing?
Yeah, definitely. It's hard to say exactly when it's going to become an immediate problem, but it will become an immediate problem. Quantum computers exist. The idea of how they can be used to defeat encryption exists. What we need is just these quantum computers to reach a sufficient size and kind of processing and the amount of qubits they can deal with, and then suddenly encryption is no longer valid. And depending on who gets that first quantum computer depends on how big of a problem that is. To kind of link back to last month's brief, if anyone was at that, if China are the first ones to develop a quantum computer, that is a very, very significant issue. If someone like IBM, a kind of big Western company, does it, that's less of a concern for us in the West, because they are unlikely to come targeting kind of private Western companies. So it just depends on where it comes from, how big of a risk it is. But it is definitely, that is the big risk on the horizon. And it might be 5 years out, it might be 10 years out, but suddenly that will become a real issue overnight if people aren't paying attention to it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think very much as you've described it, as an arms race. So yeah, absolutely. So we have a quick question from Sam. I've heard that asking a person to pick up a pen, turn sideways, do some other unexpected movement based on action could work to make video authorization possible. Knowing about your colleagues on a more personal level, for example, asking how your run was when perhaps they don't go for runs. So maybe we need to know more about our colleagues and move around on video calls. Yeah, so an interesting couple of observations there. Keen to get your thoughts, Jerry.
Yeah, no, definitely. The idea of knowing more about the individual possibly breaks down if you're dealing with a large organization. We're a relatively small company, kind of person-wise, so it's reasonable to expect that maybe you would be able to kind of reference a teammate and give some information there. But if you're an IT department for a company that has 10,000 employees, 50,000 employees, then it's much harder to use that kind of authentication method of, hey, tell me something personal there. The unexpected movements thing that could work as long as the movements that we're using are sufficiently random. If your company protocol is to ask someone to stand up and do a spin, all it needs is some threat actor to know that that is your method and they can prepare in advance for that. I know there's a lot of IT departments fall into similar habits of, whenever we reset a password, here is the system that we use to reset passwords. So you can prompt a reset password, and if you know that system, you can then brute force it much easier because you know it's going to be a color, an animal, and then 3 numbers, for example. So yeah. It's definitely something to keep in mind, but there's always risks with these sort of things, that protocols and processes that large companies have in place implements a slight weakness in it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I, from my perspective, Sam, I think it's a very astute observation, and certainly, given the right set of circumstances, could certainly be an effective deterrent against the kind of AI-based attacks as well. But as Jerry's outlined, obviously, maybe not suitable for every single organisation. Okay, fantastic. So appreciate we're sort of at the top of our presentation, half past. If you want to flick on just a couple of slides, Jerry. Really just to say thank you. If you have made it this far, then you're more than welcome to access our free Gartner market guide. There's a link that's just gone into the chat, so please feel free to download that. And if anyone else does have any questions about anything we've talked about today, any of the services that we offer as an organisation, please do feel free to get in touch with us, drop us an email. There's plenty more content on our website, so these briefings will be hosted on there when the recording is finished. So please, if you want to check back, listen again, share with your colleagues, pop over to our website, and we hope to see you next month for more of the same. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining us today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.